Hello, this is the Be Engaged podcast, where we bring together brilliant minds, elevate discussion across many industries in an effort to promote unity. Welcome. I'm your host, Michelle Harper. We are talking today with Hanifa Nakiryowa. Hanifa is the acid attack survivor and women's rights activist. After surviving an acid attack in Uganda in 2011, which was orchestrated by her ex-husband, she turned her pain into activism. Welcome to the podcast, Hanifa.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me tonight.
Great.
I'm so excited about this.
Great. So we're going to be starting things off with an inspiring fact. Then we'll get into the discussion. And then usually at the end, I do a favorite quote of the podcast. So be thinking about what was funny, interesting, whatever you want. Okay, so interesting fact. So a heartbreaking yet interesting fact is that many acid attack survivors become activists, turning their trauma into force for change. So for example, Hanifa, where you founded the Survivors of Acid and Burn Violence Foundation, which supports survivors through rehabilitation, legal aid, and empowerment programs.
That's right.
So why acid attacks continue in Uganda and beyond? When I looked that up, it said easy access to acid, weak laws and enforcement, gender-based violence, lack of awareness and support. So that's a heartbreaking yet inspiring fact. But what do you think about that fact?
All that is correct. And the bottom line is the societal norms and culture, how the society is designed, how it's structured, the cultural norms that go on, the socialization of women in these countries where acid attacks are predominant. Except for a few outliers like the United Kingdom and the United States of America. But in countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Nepal, Uganda, the common denominator is these are hegemonic masculine societies. When you look at a case of like the recent news from Syria, where women are not even allowed to speak because their voice is regarded as intimate, it could entice a man to sin. So they are not allowed to speak now. So there is completely no voice for women in Syria, to the Taliban, right? To the point that even their kitchens, when the woman is in the kitchen cooking, the recent news that I read, they are taking off the windows from the kitchen so that women cannot be seen at all. So we have those kinds of societies, we have those kinds of communities where women are still regarded as such. So particularly from my country, women are treated as second-class citizens. So I personally came from the intersection of culture and religion. Culturally, I'm raised as a girl child to be a wife, a good mother, period. That's the accomplishment, right? Religiously, I was born and raised in a Muslim family. As a Muslim woman, I'm expected to obey my parents. From my parents, when I'm married off, I then have to obey my husband for me to see the gates of heaven. So that's how it's structured. So that combined together made up Hanifa. It made up who Hanifa was expected to be. And that affects many women in my country, in my culture, across the country. And I have done some research and I find that common denominator in all the countries where acid attacks are a problem, except the United Kingdom, where specifically acid attacks in the UK are gang related, not a case of intimate partner violence largely, except a few cases like Katie Piper, who was attacked by the ex-husband. But majority of the cases in the UK that are on the rise are not intimate partner violence related. They are gang violence. But for this country specifically, for the points that you're talking about, it comes back to the common denominator. These are hegemonic masculine societies where men feel they have power over women. if a woman comes up and demonstrates some sense of empowerment and resilience and strength, that is seen as a threat. So I tend to
Yeah.
think there are embedded insecurities in the men who do something like this. And then that takes us back to how are these men raised and groomed? And when you look at that kind of culture, it kind of reinforces men, being bullies, demonstrating their masculinity by oppressing women. If you don't oppress a woman, if you don't make her feel less than, then you're not man enough. And so that's how that was my driving force to say no. A woman has equal rights as a man. If we are all created in the image of God, there is no such a thing as less than in humanity.
Yeah. And so when we were talking about the interesting facts there, said acid is sold with little regulation. And then even when acid attacks do occur, this is new. This is all new to me. I'm just learning.
Yeah.
I don't have any experience with this, so I might have some fundamental questions here. But the lenient, the punishments are not to the perpetrators. There's no repercussions for it. So I don't understand how. So it can be bought, and there's no repercussions. Why would a society allow this one person to do this to another person?
That's right. I wouldn't really say the society allows this one person to do it to another, but I always relate it to gun violence. Access to guns in this country, it's so easy, right? It's not easy to access a gun in Uganda. There are
Oh, okay.
laws and regulations that govern owning a firearm in Uganda, and they are implemented. They could do the same thing with acid, with corrosive chemicals, right? The same way they have managed to control possession of firearms in Uganda is the same way they could manage access and use of corrosive chemicals like concentrated sulfuric acid, which is mainly used in maiming and disfiguring people. So
Yeah.
why is it that it's still a problem? That's a very good question. One thing I know from experience is, you see how we have car batteries? In Uganda, we still use car batteries that use sulfuric acid, that use acids. They refill those batteries with acid to recharge them. The shops, the roadside stores, the auto shops, the garages, and those kinds of auto mechanic shops that actually do the battery refilling for the cars are in possession of concentrated sulfuric acid that could cause this kind of harm. There is no regulation in terms of who they are selling the acid to, the concentrated. There is no need for them to sell concentrated acid to a human being if they can bring their batteries to be refilled at the refilling station.
Yeah.
But the level of poverty, right, in these countries is heartbreaking, that sometimes the person has to weigh in between having a meal on the table for their children by selling a liter or half a liter of concentrated sulfuric acid to an individual who is bringing in good money, sometimes thrice the price of that amount, versus requesting for proof of identity and stuff like that before they can sell the chemical to them. You see the catch-22?
Yeah. It's the
Then the
poverty.
government does not put in place regulations that govern how the acid leaves the labs and the warehouses to these roadside stores and shops. The lack of that regulation is what makes it very easy for anyone to access the concentrated chemical. But there is really no need for the concentrated chemical to be in circulation in the country. The government can easily do something about that, the same way they have done something effective about ownership of firearms. But do they care? They will look
Doesn't
at,
sound
when you
like it.
talk about, oh,
Yeah.
we need to address this, the first thing they'll think about are the numbers. What are the number of attacks do we have here, right? And to me, my very core of my activism is It's not about the numbers. It's about the quality of life. One life matters, right? Every statistic begins with the number one. I am that number one. How many people are being impacted by what happened to me? My children, my siblings, my extended family, my community, my village, a country is affected. Because if I'm not contributing to my economy, the economy is affected. I'm a contributing individual to my economy. So until we really begin to look at it that way, then we can begin to look at solutions to address it. I feel the governments haven't really taken proactive action and steps to address this simply because it's not a priority to them, since the majority of people who are attacked are already people that are in poverty. There are extreme cases for people who are not really in poverty, but someone does it. I always tend to relate that to mental health challenges, which is another whole elephant in the room. But that's really the issue. The regulation is a gap, and that's why in 2015, 2016, I led the online petition to the government of Uganda, specifically the president, to pass the Toxic Chemicals Prohibition and Control Bill into law,
Wow.
with hopes that that could actually drive decision-making and policy towards putting in place stringent laws and regulations that govern the supply, sale, and use of concentrated acid in Uganda. Priority, when I was working with my team, the priority was to get that law into Parliament to be discussed. The Parliament will discuss issues that are not really core. I'll give an example. In 2012, immediately after my attack, it was December 2011 when I was attacked. February 2012, the members of Parliament were sitting and they were presenting the domestic bill, which would protect women's rights from abuse and exploitation, and allowing women to own and inherit property. They used my case because my case was one of the very rare cases of domestic violence in the country. I'm a fairly learned woman. My perpetrator is a university professor. So yeah, that's a rare occurrence, right? Was used as a case study to pass the domestic bill. But then after that, what happened? The domestic bill was passed. Is it being implemented as a law? Is it protecting the women really? No, but it was documented that someone pioneered that and it was passed and they would use it for their next re-election, right? It's only in the books. I always tend to joke that Uganda has the most beautifully crafted and written policies in the books. But when it comes to implementation,
it takes people to implement it.
When it comes to legislation too, the corruption, the level of corruption is heartbreaking.
I do love that you've turned it into a positive. That was an interesting fact. So getting into the discussion, so we were introduced by a mutual friend, Melissa, and I want to kind of get to know you too. So you have 2 children, is that correct?
I have 2 young ladies.
Oh, so you were raising some strong girls.
Yes.
What do they think about this background, and do they see their father, your ex-husband, their father ever, and what's their take and their perception on this?
When this happened, they were little. My older daughter was 5, turning 6 years old. My younger daughter was only 21 months old, way back in 2011. My younger daughter sustained burns during my attack. My older daughter witnessed the events as they unfolded that night.
Yeah.
And these children have had to live with that all their lives. They are the reason I wake up strong, positive, because my desire is for my children to see good in the face of cruelty. I still believe in the goodness in the world, and I have seen goodness in the world, and I want to demonstrate that to my children, to see good. Because yes, their father did this, right? But then we could not control what their father could do, but I have full control over how I could react to that.
Yeah, I agree.
And I took
There's not you.
ownership of that.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody about staying regulated in the midst of unregulated people. He got very unregulated, and you can only respond. You're only in control of how you respond to things in life in general. And are you going
That's
to make the
right.
best of it and be a positive person and respond respectfully? And no matter how people treat you, I will still, treat you respectfully or not. That's a great lesson for the kids. It's a tough lesson for your girls,
Yeah,
but
that's
your
right. So
activism and what you're doing is just such a great role model example.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So I look at where I would love my kids to learn. What kind of citizens am I raising, And me being their only role model, I try to model the kind of person I wish for them to be.
Yeah. So what got the temperature in that fateful night? I don't know, day, night. What got your ex-husband to that point of I am going to ruin the person that is the mother of my children and potentially their lives as well? How does that manifest? Is it you talked about a hyper masculine society?
Mhm,
How maybe people are raised in a society like that to
mhm,
say, yes, I should be able to do this, I can do this, and I won't have any repercussions for it.
mhm.
Talk more about what's the background to getting to that place that person thought it was acceptable to do this.
Hmm. That's a good question. I guess he looked at me as property. He viewed me as property. He viewed me as one he could toss around, tell what to do, what not to do, because yeah, that's what it was. There are so many things I did not agree with until I reached my breaking point or my turning point. I tend to call it turning point. And I looked at my daughters with the abuse going on in the house. And I told myself, I don't want my children to normalize this, and I have to do something about it. And so I stepped up. I told myself I can't continue to be a housewife with a master's degree in someone's kitchen as my career. I have to pursue a career because I had goals before I got married. I wanted a successful career before I got married. That's why I was going to school. So I
Yeah,
decided I'm going to chase my dreams. And when I decided that, he knew, I think deep down he knew there was no turning back for me because
yeah,
he threatened me across the board and I just stood my ground because I knew what I wanted. And so he gave me two options: quit the job and stay as a housewife and everything will be happily ever after, or keep my job and leave his house. And guess what I chose?
keep the job, leave the house.
That's what I did.
Yeah. So there was
I
abuse
so
prior to that, though. So even if
so
the other
prior to
option
that,
was
yeah,
stay in
that's
the
what I was
house,
coming to.
you're like, I'm still going to be abused every day, and my girls are going to see that. And then
Thank
ultimately,
you very
we've known
much.
through research
Thank you
that the
very much.
girls, the
Yes.
kids that see that, they
Hmm.
marry into that same thing, and that continues. So basically, if you stayed, then your girls were going to choose a husband that beats them, and they were going to accept that. They were
Exactly.
going to normalize that. So that's not
Thank you.
acceptable.
Absolutely. So I had to break that cycle at whatever cost. And if this was the cost, I am happy because I'm raising empowered girls today. So prior to all that, I had, many times I always want to talk about the challenges that victims of domestic violence experience, and someone who has not walked a mile in their shoes will never understand. Many times, a victim of domestic violence knows that they are being abused, but the abuser knows how to plant a seed of fear in the victim that one fears to even quit. Even when they make the attempts, They are put in a situation, they are so manipulated. I was so manipulated that I thought I couldn't do anything. A part of me would tell me I can do it. Then the other part of me was talked out of it by the surrounding environment, the culture, the religion. You can't do that. You're shaming family. You're bringing shame to family. You can't do it. So you become the puppet, that is upholding family values, everything.
Yeah. Well, they put the onus on the women that are even getting abused culturally. It's looked down upon to leave a situation, even when you were getting abused. That support is not there.
That's right.
Because
That's
society
right.
wants to keep, I don't know. I don't really
You have
know
to keep
why.
your family dignity. You have to keep your value as a woman and dignity as a woman. Suck it up. And I was like, nope. So each time I attempted to leave, they brought me back.
Your family did. Everybody, the
Yeah,
society, the culture
yeah,
was like,
yeah.
oh, you're going back and go
He
ahead and
would
still get
come.
abused. Let the girls see you getting abused every day. But yeah, go ahead and go back to that. Why
That's
is
right.
that in societies?
Yes.
Why does that happen? Why do they do that? Why do they not support? Why don't they teach the abuser not to abuse versus blaming the one that's getting abused for breaking up the family or for doing something wrong when you're already being
Yeah.
abused?
We have a lot of work to do with our boys and men and how we are raising them and grooming them to be men, right?
But the women
Because
raise the men. 99% in our culture, I always say this, 100% of people on this earth are developed inside of a woman's body. We grow 100% of the human population. 99% of it we raise. Does it turn out that we raise, and our DNA is built this way to keep people alive, tell people what's right and wrong, and then a portion of those people turn out to turn on women? Why is that?
that's a very good question that I would always ask every mother of a son out there. What
Is it
role
just
did
like
you
we're
play?
not, yeah,
Yeah, as
do
a
we
mother,
allow,
what role am I playing in my son's behavior as a man to somebody else's daughter?
yeah, or just, I mean, but we're teaching right and wrong. I just don't know. I don't understand how it gets this way with the women being the ones that are raising the children too. Because it's up to us to say,
I
hey,
also,
don't treat people that
exactly,
way.
that's a very good point that you're making. Where are the men in
And
raising
raising,
responsible men?
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
because
in my particular case, I do have to stand up for my husband.
I would have
We're
to
as
say, though,
50-50 as it gets around
yeah, from
my area, but
experience, I
that's,
would have to say, though, Michelle, from observation, men raised by women are actually men. They respect women. Majority of men raised by women do respect women.
yes, I would agree with that. The majority of men in this world are respectful to women. It's just
Yes.
there's a small portion.
There's a small portion, and
Wow.
when you map out, when you do the family mapping and look at the background and where they are coming from, there is always a loophole somewhere, something missing. And I think that missing piece is what they are trying to fill with ego, with control, with everything. I think they are wounded somewhere and they don't know how to admit that they are wounded to get help. They simply project it on others through abuse and manipulation and control and everything to make them feel like men, maybe because they were raised not feeling like real men. I don't know.
I don't know. I have two boys. I have a girl. For the two boys, I would love to take a class on how best to raise an upstanding man. I mean, I feel like I am through my modeling and with my daughter. And again, in my household, my husband is fantastic, which is why I married him. It's a 50-50 kind of a household as much as it gets. I mean, there's only so
He
far
should
that
hear
goes
this, right?
because my DNA is to raise the kids. That's what I do. But in
Yeah.
any case, yeah. So I know I'm in a special situation and I have to be very, um, grateful for that. But I do want to understand, how do I raise men the right way? Because I don't want to be too hard on them because of our society. I want to be fair, but I also want them to know that it's your responsibility not to hurt women. It's your responsibility to stop. And I do think that comes from having self-confidence. If they have self-confidence, then they don't lash out and they don't try to overcompensate by being so aggressive. On that same note, because I'm in the middle of raising children, I do see naturally there's a natural difference between some boys that are ultra type A aggressive, and that our society, when they're young, those aggressive souls, they tend to do well when they're young because everybody's scared and they won't stand up to them. And then in my mind, I keep thinking, oh gosh, that's going to be one to watch out for, to be careful of, because they're so aggressive and nobody's pushing back on them when they're young, that could get out of control. Same thing applies to women. Same thing applies to girls. My daughter, in her group, there's certain aggressive girls and there's certain girls that are not aggressive. And the aggressive girls, nobody pushes back on them. Yet, I think later on in society, those aggressive girls do get a lot of pushback. But I think maybe in society, those aggressive boys that are really good at sports and that, rise to the top because nobody's going to take them down, they don't ever in society get that pushback that says, hey, that might be a little bit much. They tend to be the leaders in work. Sometimes they tend to be leaders in the world stage because nobody is willing to push back. So I'm just trying to figure out how to be the best mom for the boys as well. I think that's just as important as being a role model for the girls.
I think so too. The one thing, I have some good role models for my kids, like married couples that I observe and look up to. And the way you model how mom and dad live in the house is going to shape how your son is going to treat his wife. Is going to shape what your daughter can put up with out there. Yeah, so if you have an abusive husband and accept that before your children, you're normalizing that for them. And that was where I had to tell myself, I can't normalize this for my girls. They have to know that if there is abuse, you can always walk away.
It's a fundamental lesson.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I still say it as they grow old now. I tell them, I know that you're getting to a stage where you're going to get into relationships. A relationship has to be equitable. You should never have to compromise for somebody else. You are complementing one another. You're not sacrificing. If it ever feels like you have to drop something that you have grown up with as a part of you to accommodate somebody, then something is not right. So those are the kinds of conversations we have. Relationships are complementary, not sacrificial.
Yeah, it's got to be equitable. Yeah.
Yeah. So I keep telling them that in everything that we do, I remind them I'm giving you all these tools so you are an empowered woman who comes to the room as a complement to somebody else. And so that's how they should also show up to you as a complement. That they know without them you can still stand. That's the kind of woman you should be. And that's what defines a relationship where you meet in the middle. Not one staying in their straight line and the other has to skew their line or pivot to the point where they have to meet the other where they are and move. I don't really agree with that. I don't want to speak as a feminist, but then sometimes you have to face reality.
So you've been through a lot. You left your abusive husband that ended up doing the attack for your girls and for the future. But how about you? How did you feel afterwards? How do you feel now? That was what a crazy life experience right after it. How did you feel? And walk us through that to kind of where you are today.
Interestingly, I felt empowered through my pain. Going through that gave me my power back. It gave me everything I ever tried to ask for. The independence, the freedom. It's like, when you're seeing yourself perishing, but then you're like, oh, I'm finally free. I was like, I looked at all the wonderful things.
You're like, my face hurts,
it felt so
but it felt good.
It's so funny when I say
I'm so sorry. I'm like laughing about it. It's not a laughing subject.
It's interesting talking about it, how I felt. I was going through pain. It was excruciating pain. But in the midst of that pain, I was hopeful.
Yeah.
Ask me why.
Why?
Because I knew I was not going back. Ever.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like,
I
this
knew
is
he
it.
had done something so clear that my family would never ask me to go back to him.
Yeah.
I knew I could redefine who I wanted to be because now nobody could tell me what to do because
Yeah.
no one was going through what I was going through right there. So it's like it gave me a voice.
So
My
in an
pain gave me a
interesting
voice.
kind of way, the attack actually gave you your voice for the rest of
It
your
did.
life.
Hmm.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah. And it awakened my sleeping spirit because my spirit had been bound, chained so long that I had no voice. I couldn't do anything for myself. I had fear. I was terrified to do anything. But this put me in a place where I either had to rise up and stand or stay fallen.
Yeah.
I had two choices: to stay down and fall or rise up and stand.
What about
Huh?
your family after the attack? Your family finally accepted, yes, you can leave. And did you have both your mother and father when you were
Yeah,
growing up?
I have both my mother and father, and my dad especially. I'm daddy's girl, and my
Oh, so
dad.
this is interesting. So you had a strong father influence,
Yes,
which
I'm
ultimately
daddy's
made you
girl.
strong enough to stand up.
Yes and no. My father is a religious leader, so he always expected me to follow the religious values as they should be followed, right? So he raised me to be that well-groomed religious girl, to uphold his reputation as a community leader, right? But the one thing I know is our dad loves us so much. Our dad gave us an education. He raised us as girls in a society that looks down on girls, but he gave us a decent education, even when he knew we were going to end up as someone else's wife. So that was an investment for the person that would become our husband. But he still did it as a responsible dad. For that, I applaud him so much. He didn't back down on all the bullying that he experienced, and the backlash he continued to give us a decent education. That's how I have a college education, because my dad stood his ground to
Well, he
educate
gave
his
you
daughters.
dreams. He gave you dreams. He gave you an education, gave you dreams, which ultimately kind of contributed to you saying, "Hey, this being abused in a relationship, never being able to leave the house, never being able to do anything, I can't I can't be like that because I'm an educated person and that's not
That's so
fulfilling of my
true.
life."
Mhm.
Yeah, so what did
And
your
those are
dad think?
reflections I always had. I told myself, my dad did not educate me to be someone else's chef. And I would always tell my ex-husband, yeah, if you raised your daughter and gave them an education, would you want them to end up where I am right now?
What did he say?
Nothing. Nothing.
So when the incident happened, what did your dad finally do? Was he like,
He was
did have you
crushed.
guys? He was crushed,
He
and
has,
he you
I
guys
know,
talked
yeah,
about
the
it, and
reason I'm bringing my dad into this conversation is because I know my dad has never recovered from that.
oh gosh,
Yeah, I feel bad for him. He has never recovered from that because he's still, uh, he's stuck in the moment where I would tell him, you're taking me back to a bad spot. I'm trying to run for my dear life and you're throwing me back into hellfire. Why don't you let me live my life the way I know I should live my life?
yeah,
So yeah, so each time he's crushed and each time he recalls, when we talk about trauma, I think
yeah.
I
This is
tend to
some
joke
trauma
that
right here. Oh
My PTSD was transferred to my dad so I can live.
no,
Yeah,
you're
because
like,
my dad is stuck in that moment where I used to tell him, Dad, please let me leave this marriage. It's not working. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my life.
And you got real close to losing your
Yeah,
life.
and each time he kept saying, I wish I listened to my child.
Well, I mean, it's your activism that came out of it, the positivity, the example that you're giving to your daughters is honestly just amazing, and it's something to definitely highlight in life. And this is how you can live on through an acid attack and live on and move away from your abusers. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, so the quote of the podcast, I had one in my head. The quote, this isn't like a funny, but even though we had a good time, you have a quote of the podcast. And then I'll think of mine that I had it at the tip of my tongue. What was something interesting that you learned or something interesting that we talked about that you want to highlight?
Yeah, something we talked about that I want to highlight is how I turned my pain into purpose.
Great.
Yeah, I would have never become the woman that I am if this didn't happen. So my appeal always to someone who has gone through some kind of atrocity or adversity or crisis is, what is in it for you and for the world around you? And when I ask that question, what is in this for me and for the world around me, I'm always looking for the light in the face of darkness. Where is the light? What can keep me moving? What can get me up every morning? And at the end of the day, I say, oh, I am grateful for this day because I made this contribution to the world around me. For me, so this is January, February. The first quarter of every year is always a very busy time for me because I'm trying to raise funds to make sure that the children of us have an education. I value education so much, Michelle, because the education my father gave me, the education my mother gave me and contributed to, helped me go through what I went through and still dream and still pursue that dream. The reason I say that is because I work with women because they don't have that education, that gift. Once it happens to them, they feel it's the end. They are hopeless. They don't see anything ahead of them. They are stuck in that situation, and that's what the perpetrator wants. So my organization, Ceresav, which I started in 2012 after I left the hospital, because I saw the need to bring these women out. Every woman hid their face under the veil. I did that too. I hid my maimed face under the veil because I was so ashamed of myself. I was so embarrassed of how I looked. I so feared what the society, what the people were going to say about me. I woke up one day and I told myself, no, this is giving my perpetrator the satisfaction. This is exactly what they wanted. To eliminate me from the face of earth while I'm still here, right? I'm here but invisible. And I told myself, nope, I have to be visible and heard. So I unveiled my maimed face as my first step to the national campaign of zero tolerance to acid attack violence in Uganda. And I went on a national campaign to encourage every acid attack survivor to unveil their maimed faces so the public can see what we are dealing with, right? Because when we are talking of numbers, we are talking about quality of life here. Look at this instead of counting numbers, right?
The real impact. Yeah.
It worked.
Well, my quote of the podcast was when you talked about your dad, that your trauma, and you called it your PTSD, transferred to him because they didn't stand up for you soon enough. Like, that's not a funny quote, but I never thought of that before, that it can, the folks that don't stand up for the women that are getting abused, that ultimately can transfer, that trauma transfers to them too, because they're part of that. So for folks to give money, so this is the first quarter of the year, and this is when you do a lot of the fundraising. And so how can folks donate money and contribute to your cause?
So the organization is called Ceresav,
Okay.
which stands for Center for Rehabilitation of Survivors of Acid Violence.
Okay.
It's a 501c3, so your donation is tax exempt. So you can go to www.ceresavusa.com and you can donate there. We have an active fundraiser for the education fund. We are still collecting donations for that to support the women. To support the children to go back to school. We not only do the education fund, we provide life-saving medical support. So I'm always looking for those kinds of partnerships. So Michelle, or in your network, if you know people, pharmaceutical companies that could provide like supplements that can help the women, cosmetic companies that we can partner with, because there is a need to redefine beauty. There is a need to redefine beauty for someone whose natural beauty has been burnt and melted away by a chemical and is all maimed, has no nose, has no sight, has no everything. How do we make them still feel beautiful? Is beauty seen or felt? Right? So I would love to see cosmetic companies, coming out to advocate for the redefinition of beauty. So we do provide life-saving medical support with reconstructive surgeries. I have a partnership with a foundation in California, Face Forward, that has agreed to bring in patients to get pro bono reconstructive surgeries. So we do the life-saving care in Uganda, rehabilitation, then we refer them to Face Forward in California to get reconstructive surgeries free of charge. But then they have to go back home and rebuild their lives, economic sustainability. So getting them here, helping them get back on their feet. We do the advocacy and the education, public education, prevention education, engaging the community leaders and boys and men into this campaign. We do all that. And we can't do it without the support of the public. Because Hanifa, I have a voice and a
Yeah,
face.
and you're
I
using it
don't
very
have
well.
the resources. I don't have the financial resources.
Yeah. So when people donate, it goes to the rehabilitation, it goes to the children, the folks impacted, their education. It goes to just overall any surgeries that are needed, so that those donations are really, really impactful.
Yes, they
Great.
are very impactful. 100% of all the money that I raise goes to Uganda. That's my giving back. I don't pay myself for doing that.
That's fantastic. You are so important in this world. Thank you, Hanifa. Thank you for joining
My
the Be
pleasure.
Engaged podcast. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining the Be Engaged podcast. This podcast was prepared by the author in her personal capacity. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the author and do not reflect the official policy, opinion, or position of her employer. Thank you again for joining. All rights reserved to Be Engaged.